Start. Okay, testing. Mic is hot enough-ish.
See, we gotta make sure that YouTube is.
So, we are doing this on a reading of the Discourse of Voluntary Servitude, written 1549, first published 1576, by Étienne de La Boétie. Étienne de La Boétie was a classicist, writer, poet, political theorist, anti-statist, utopian, and civil disobedience thought person. You can read a little bit about his life and writings. But another French European liberty writer and European anarchist. And we have a short, 20-ish page thing that should take, we'll see how long to read. 10 to 20 minutes, and then we're going to have a reaction to this work and talk about how some of these things that were discussed in the past apply to our modern standards of liberty and freedom in the United States and our ability to be independent people who aren't slaves. And I'll be right back to start that in 1 second. All right, and we got Jared from Mentally Illest. He's going to be reacting to the voluntary servitude, just the Discourse of Voluntary Servitude, and talking about some of the modern issues with me in the U.S. All right, so part 1. I see no good in having several lords, let one alone be master. Let one alone be king. These words Homer puts in the mouth of Ulysses as he addresses the people. If he had said nothing further than I see no good in having several lords, it would have been well spoken. For the sake of logic, he should have maintained that the rule of several could not be good, since the power of one man alone, as soon as he acquires the title of master, becomes abusive and unreasonable. Instead, he declared, what seems preposterous, let one alone be master, let one alone be king. We must not be critical of Ulysses, who at the moment was perhaps obliged to speak these words in order to quell a mutiny in the army. For this reason, in my opinion, choosing language to meet the emergency rather than the truth. Yet, in the light of reason, it is a great misfortune to be at the beck and call of one master, for it is impossible to be sure that he is going to be kind, since it is always in his power to be cruel whenever he pleases. As for having several masters, according to the number one has, it amounts to being that many times unfortunate. Although I do not wish at this time to discuss this much debated question, namely whether other types of government are preferable to monarchy, still I would like to know, before casting doubt on the place that monarchy should occupy among commonwealths, whether or not it belongs to such a group, since it is hard to believe that there is anything of commonwealth in a country where everything belongs to one master. This question, however, can remain for another time, and would really require a separate treatment involving by its very nature all sorts of political discussion. For the present, I should like merely to understand how it happens that so many men, so many villages, so many cities, so many nations suffer under a single tyrant who has no other power than the power they give him, who is able to harm them only to the extent which they have the willingness to bear him, who could do them absolutely no injury unless they preferred to put up with him rather than contradict him. Surely a striking situation. Yet it is so common that one must grieve the more and wonder the less at the spectacle of 1,000,000 men serving in wretchedness, their necks under the yoke, not constrained by a greater multitude than they, but simply, it would seem, delighted and charmed by the name of one man alone whose power they need not fear, for he is evidently the one person whose qualities they cannot admire because of his inhumanity and brutality toward them. A weakness characteristic of humankind is that we often have to obey force. We have to make concessions. We ourselves cannot always be the stronger. Therefore, when a nation is constrained by the fortune of war to serve a single clique, as happened when the city of Athens served the 30 tyrants, one should not be amazed that the nation obeys, but simply be grieved by the situation. Or rather, instead of being amazed or saddened, consider patiently the evil and look forward hopefully toward a happier future. Our nature is such that the common duties of human relationship occupy a great part of the discourse of our life, of the course of our life. It is reasonable to love virtue, to esteem good deeds, to be grateful for good from whatever source we may receive it, and often to give up some of our comfort in order to increase the honor and advantage of some man who we love and who deserves it. Therefore, if the inhabitants of a country have found some great personage who has shown rare foresight in protecting them in an emergency, rare boldness in defending them, rare solicitude in governing them, and if from that point on they contract the habit of obeying him and depending on him to such an extent that they grant him certain prerogatives, I fear that such a procedure is not prudent, inasmuch as they remove him from a position in which he was doing good and advance him to a dignity in which he may do evil. Certainly, while he continues to manifest good will, one need fear no harm from a man who seems to be generally well disposed. But, O good Lord, what strange phenomenon is this? What name shall we give to it? What is the nature of this misfortune? What vice is it, or rather, what degradation? To see an endless multitude of people not merely obeying, but driven to servility, not ruled, but tyrannized over. These wretches have no wealth, no kin, nor wife, nor children, not even life itself that they can call their own. They suffer plundering, wantonness, cruelty, not from an army, not from a barbarian horde on account of whom they must shed their blood and sacrifice their lives, but from a single man. Not from a Hercules, nor from a Samson, but from a single little man. Too frequently, this same little man is the most cowardly and effeminate in the nation, a stranger to the powder of battle and hesitant on the sands of the tournament, not only without energy to direct men by force, but with hardly enough virility to bed with a common woman. Shall we call subjection to such a leader cowardice? Shall we say that those who serve him are cowardly and faint-hearted? If 2, if 3, if 4 do not defend themselves from the one, we might call that circumstance surprising, but nevertheless conceivable. In such a case, one might be justified in suspecting a lack of courage. But if 1,000, if 1,000 endure the caprice of a single man, should we not rather say that they lack not the courage but the desire to rise against him, and that such an attitude indicates indifference rather than cowardice?
No.
When not 100, not 1,000 men, but 100 provinces, 1,000 cities, 1,000,000 men refuse to assail a single man from whom the kindest treatment received is the infliction of serfdom and slavery, what shall we call that? Is it cowardice?
Yes.
Of course there is in fear one. But when 1,000, 1,000,000 men, 1,000 cities fail to protect themselves against the domination of one man, this cannot be called cowardly, for cowardice does not sink to such a depth, any more than valor can be termed the effort of one individual to scale a fortress, to attack an army, or to conquer a kingdom. What monstrous vice, then, is this which does not even deserve to be called cowardice? A vice for which no term can be found vile enough, which nature herself disavows and our tongues refuse to name. Place on one side 50,000 armed men, and on the other the same number. Let them join in battle, one side fighting to retain its liberty, the other to take it away. To which would you, at a guess, promise victory? Which men do you think would march more gallantly to combat? That those who anticipate as a reward for their suffering the maintenance of their freedom? Or those who cannot expect any other prize for the blows exchanged than the enslavement of others? One side will have before its eyes the blessing of the past and the hope of similar joy in the future. Their thoughts will dwell less on the comparatively brief pain of battle than on what they may have to endure forever. They, their children, and all their posterity. The other side has nothing, and which can never be so keen. It seems to me that it will not be dismayed by the least drop of blood from wounds. Consider the justly famous battles of Miltiades, Leonidas, Themistocles, still fresh today in recorded history in the minds of men as if they had occurred but yesterday. Battles fought in Greece for the welfare of the Greeks and as an example to the world. What power do you think gave to such a mere handful of men not the strength, but the courage to withstand the attack of a fleet so vast that even the seas were burdened, and to defeat the armies of so many nations, armies so immense that their officers alone outnumbered the entire Greek force? What was it but the fact that in those glorious days this struggle represented not so much a fight of Greeks against Persians as a victory of liberty over domination, of freedom over greed? It amazes us to hear accounts of the valor that liberty arouses in the hearts of those who defend it. But who could believe reports of what goes on every day among the inhabitants of some countries? Who could really believe that one man alone may mistreat 100,000 and deprive them of their liberty? Who would credit such a report if he merely heard it, without being present to witness the event? And if this condition occurred only in distant lands, and were reported to us, which one among us would not assume the table to be imagined or invented, and not really true? Obviously, there is no need of fighting to overcome this single tyrant, for he is automatically defeated if the country refuses consent to its own enslavement. It is not necessary to deprive him of anything, but simply to give him nothing. There is no need that the country make an effort to do anything for itself, provided it does nothing against itself. It is therefore the inhabitants themselves who permit, or rather bring about, their own subjection, since by ceasing to submit, they would put an end to their servitude. A people enslaves itself, cuts its own throat. When having a choice between vassals and freer men, it deserts its liberties and takes on the yoke, gives consent to its own misery, or rather, apparently welcomes it. If it costs the people anything to recover its freedom, I should not urge action to this end, although there is nothing a human should hold more dear than the restoration of his own natural right. To change himself from a beast of burden back to a man, so to speak. I do not demand of him so much boldness. Let him prefer the doubtful security of living wretchedly to the uncertain hope of living as he pleases. What then? If in order to have liberty nothing more is needed than to long for it, if only a simple act of the will is necessary, is there any nation in the world that considers a single wish too high a price to pay in order to recover rights which it ought to be ready to redeem at the cost of its blood? Rights such as their loss must bring all men of honor to the point of feeling life to be unendurable and death itself a deliverance. Deliverance? Yeah, I guess, question mark. Damn, that's a long sentence. Everyone knows that the fire from a little spark will increase and blaze ever higher as long as it finds wood to burn, yet without being quenched by water, but merely by finding no more fuel to feed on, it consumes itself, dies down, and is no longer a flame. Similarly, the more tyrants pillage, the more they crave, the more they ruin and destroy, the more one yields to them and obeys them. By that much do they become mightier and more formidable. the readier to annihilate and destroy. But if not one thing is yielded to them, if, without any violence, they are simply not obeyed, they become naked and undone as nothing, just as when the root receives no nourishment, the branch withers and dies. To achieve the good that they desire, the bold do not fear danger, the intelligent do not refuse to undergo suffering. It is the stupid and cowardly who are neither able to endure hardship nor to vindicate their rights. They stop at merely longing for them, and lose through timidity the valor roused by the effort to claim their rights. Although the desire to enjoy them still remains as a part of their nature, a longing common to both the wise and the foolish, to brave men and to cowards, is this longing for all those things which, when acquired, would make them happy and contented. Yet one element appears to be lacking. I do not know how it happens that nature fails to place within the hearts of men a burning desire for liberty, a blessing so great and so desirable that when it is lost, all evils follow thereafter, and even the blessings that remain lose taste and savor because of the corruption by servitude. Liberty is the only joy upon which men do not seem to insist, for surely if they really wanted it, they would receive it. Apparently they refuse this wonderful privilege because it is so easily acquired. Poor, wretched, and stupid peoples, nations determine on your own misfortune and blind to your own good. You let yourselves be deprived before your own eyes of the best part of your revenues. Your fields are plundered, your homes robbed, your family heirlooms taken away. You live in such a way that you cannot claim a single thing as your own, and it would seem that you consider yourselves lucky to be loaned your property, your families, and your very lives. All this havoc, this misfortune, this ruin descends upon you not from alien foes, but from the one enemy whom you yourselves render as powerful as he is, for whom you go bravely to war, for whose greatness you do not refuse to offer your own bodies unto death. He who thus domineers over you has only 2 eyes, only 2 hands, only 1 body, no more than is possessed by the least man among the infinite numbers dwelling in your cities. He has indeed nothing more than the power that you confer upon him to destroy you. Where has he acquired enough eyes to spy upon you if you do not provide them yourselves? How can he have so many arms to beat you with if he does not borrow them from you? The feet that trample down your cities, where does he get them if they are not your own? How does he have any power over you except through you? How would he dare assail you if he had no cooperation from you? What could he do to you if you yourselves did not connive with the thief who plunders you? If you were not accomplices of the murderer who kills you? If you were not traitors to yourselves? You sow your crops in order that he may ravage them. You install and furnish your homes to give him goods to pillage. You rear your daughters that he may gratify his lust. You bring up your children in order that he may confer upon them the greatest privilege he knows, to be led into battles, to be delivered to butchery, to be made the servants of his greed and the instruments of his vengeance. You yield your bodies unto hard labor in order that he may indulge in his delights and wallow in his filthy pleasures. You weaken yourselves in order to make him the stronger and the mightier to hold you in check. From all these indignities, such as the very beasts of the field would not endure, you can deliver yourselves, if you try, not by taking action, but merely by willing to be free. Jared, could you show us in the Breathe Free messenger group the link to it?
The call flood network.
The YouTube. So you remember the chat?
Oh, the messenger group.
Yeah, the messenger group. Yeah, that'd be cool. Sure. As we start part 2, it might be good. So I'm going to finish the last sentence here and then talk for a second. Resolve to serve no more, and you are at once freed. I do not ask that you place hands upon the tyrant to topple him over, but simply that you support him no longer. Then you will behold him like a great colossus whose pedestal has been pulled away, fall off his own weight, and break into pieces. Now, I just want to say a few sentences on this while Jared's posting this, where we're headed it. But, that's one of the main points that I wanted to bring up by reading the Discourse on Voluntary Servitude by Étienne de La Boétie, written in the 1500s. And he's mostly talking about a monarch, but he's also talking about us being accomplices to our own slavery, to our own servitude. And people, they say these things, against, standing up for liberties about, are you going to, attack the government? Are you going to hurt people? Are you whatever? We don't need to do that. You don't have to place any hands upon the tyrant to topple him over. You don't support him. You don't obey. Peaceful civil disobedience is a major key to just not lending your support to threats to our freedom, to things that enslave us. There needs to be no violent action. It is a peaceful movement that stops a lot of slavery and keeps a lot of harm from being done in the world. And I'd like to talk about that, relate that more to current issues. Again, for those just tuning in or who have been listening, we are doing a reading and reaction to Étienne de La Boétie's Discourse of Voluntary Servitude from 1576. And we've read part 1.
That's a very pertinent point. That's so crazy.
Just get a little closer because I can't hear all this.
Simply by willing to be free and not obeying, not violently attacking or assaulting, just simply not obeying, and then the tyrant or the king or whoever's gonna bark orders you, they're left with egg on their face, and they can try to assault you, but not easily, knowing that you're not gonna participate.
Yeah.
So in my experience, especially lately, standing up to bullies a lot, bullies back down. Most bullies are cowards. Actually, I would think all bullies are cowards. It's a part of the description as somebody who would try to dominate somebody else. They're not looking for a fight. They're looking for
easy pickings.
They're looking for easy pickings. Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't want to fight.
And they're looking to trick you into conniving yourself into that servitude. And I think this is where he gets a little deeper into some of it. Did you share the YouTube link in the group? Or?
Yeah, I did.
Perfect.
Oh, not the YouTube link.
Oh, yeah, the YouTube link would be more appreciated. Appreciate that. Because getting views on that will help jump it up in the algorithm a bit. So again, we're reading this discourse. How long have we kind of been in here at this point, Jared? Did you see that? I can take a look real quick. And we got Steve singing in the background. Concurrent viewers. Alright, we got 1 like.
Alright, it's in the chat.
I don't even know how long this has been going. Does it tell you that?
I think Larkin Rose read that part about the whose boots would trample on you if not your own.
All right, we're at 23 minutes so far. So we're thinking this reading, it's an amazing quote, and I really want to highlight that probably in a meme later on the page. If you're following our page, please get the bell to be able to see what we
people earlier
put up.
Too, saying that it's lower than cowardice, because cowardice is being nice.
Again, that's Breathe Free Academy on Facebook.
It's lower than indifference or cowardice. It's why are you even alive if you're not even gonna take ownership and defend it?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, and that's the point where it becomes preferable to be dead, and people can reach that point. And it's happened a lot in history. And it was a lot more common in the monarchies. The system that they have now has, a lot more things to prevent something like this. But the thing is and you don't need a revolution. And a revolution is just a revolving of doors and systems. You need an evolution that is a step forward. And I think that peaceful disobedience, civil disobedience is a step towards that. So anyway, we're going to continue here.
You need to take back the forgotten word, the no. You need to know to say no, and that's where true evolution is knowing and saying no.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Fair enough. All right, so we're continuing part 2 here. Discourse of Voluntary Servitude by Étienne de La Boétie, written in the 1500s. History of liberty writing here, and gonna continue on. All right, part 2. Doctors are no doubt correct in warning us not to touch incurable wounds, and I am presumably taking chances and preaching as I do to people which has long lost all sensitivity and no longer conscious of its infirmity, is plainly suffering from mortal illness. Let us therefore understand by logic, if we can, how it happens that this obstinate willingness to submit has become so deeply rooted in a nation that the very love of liberty now seems no longer natural. God, and we see that happening right now in our country, don't we?
Yeah.
And history tends to repeat itself.
Like, what are you crazy? Are you some kind of radical? Like, some
Yeah.
kind of radical...
It's not
like,
natural.
Fringe person?
And so anyway, continuing on. In the first place, as all would agree that, if we led our lives according to the ways intended by nature and lessons taught by her, we should be intuitively obedient to our parents. Later, we should adopt reason as our guide and become slaves to nobody. Considering the obedience given instinctively to one's father and mother, we are in agreement, each one admitting himself to be a model. As to whether reason is born with us or not, that is a question loudly discussed by academicians and treated by all schools of philosophers. For the present, I think I do not err in stating that there is in our souls some native seed of reason, which if nourished by good counsel and training, flowers into virtue, but which, on the other hand, if unable to resist the vices surrounding it, is stifled and blighted. Yet surely if there is anything in this world clear and obvious to which one cannot close one's eyes, it is the fact that nature, handmaiden of God, governess of men, has cast us all in the same mold, in order that we may behold in one another companions or rare brothers. If in distributing her gifts nature has favored some more than others with respect to body or spirit, she has nevertheless not planned to place us within this world as if it were a field of battle, and has not endowed the stronger or the cleverer in order that they may act like armed brigands in a forest and attack the weaker. One should rather conclude that in distributing larger shares to some and smaller shares to others, nature has intended to give occasion for brotherly love to become manifest, some of us having the strength to give help to others who are in need of it. Hence, this kind mother has given us the whole world as a dwelling place, has lodged us in the same house, has fashioned us according to the same model, so that in beholding one another we might almost recognize ourselves. Since she has bestowed upon us all the great gift of voice and speech for fraternal relationship, thus achieving by the common and mutual statement of our thoughts a communion of our wills, and since she has tried in every way to narrow and tighten the bond of our union and kinship, since she has revealed in every possible manner her intention, not so much to associate us as to make us one organic whole, there can be no further doubt that we are all naturally free, inasmuch as we are all comrades. Accordingly, it should not enter the mind of anyone that nature has placed some of us in slavery, since she has actually created all in one likeness. Therefore, it is fruitless to argue whether or not liberty is natural, since none can be held in slavery without being wronged. And in a world governed by a nature which is reasonable, there is nothing so contrary as an injustice. Since freedom is our natural state, we are not only in possession of it, but have the urge to defend it. Now, if perchance some cast a doubt on this conclusion and are so corrupted that they are not able to recognize their rights and inborn tendencies, I shall have to do them the honor that is properly theirs and place, so to speak, brute beasts in the pulpit to throw light on their nature and condition. The very beast, God help me, if men are not too deaf, cry out to them, long live liberty. Many among them die as soon as captured. Just as the fish loses life as soon as he leaves the water, so do these creatures close their eyes upon the light and have no desire to survive the loss of their natural freedom. If the animals were to constitute their kingdom by rank, their nobility would be chosen from this type. Others, from the largest to the smallest, when captured, put up a strong resistance by means of claws, horns, beak, and paws, that they show clearly enough how they cling to what they are losing. Afterwards, in captivity, they manifest by so many evident signs their awareness of their misfortune that is easy to see. That is easy to see that they are languishing rather than living, and continue their existence more in lamentation and their lost freedom than in enjoyment of their servitude. What else can explain the behavior of the elephant, who, after defending himself to the last ounce of his strength and knowing himself on the point of being taken, dashes his jaws against the trees and breaks his tusks, thus manifesting his longing to remain free, as he has been improving his wit and ability to buy off the huntsman in the hope that through the sacrifice of his tusks, permitted to offer his ivory as a ransom for his liberty. We feed the horse from birth in order to train him to do our bidding. Yet he is tamed with such difficulty that when we begin to break him in, he bites the bit. He rears at the touch of the spur, as if to reveal his instinct and show by his actions that, if he obeys, he does so not of his own free will, but under constraint. What more can we say? Even the oxen, under the weight of the yoke, complain, and the birds in their cage lament. As I expressed in some time ago, toying with our French poesy, for I shall not hesitate in writing to you, O Longa, to introduce some of my verses. Wow, this is interesting. He talks about his poetry here, we'll see. Which I never read to you because of your obvious encouragement, which is quite likely to make me conceited. And now, since all beings, because they feel, suffer misery and subjection, and long for liberty, since the very beasts, although made for the service of man, cannot become accustomed to control without protest, what evil chance has so denatured man that he, the only creature really born to be free, lacks the memory of his original condition and the desire to return to it? There are three kinds of tyrants. Some receive their proud position through elections by the people, others by force of arms, others by inheritance. Those who have acquired power by means of war act in such wise that it is evident they rule over a conquered country. Those who are born to kingship are scarcely any better, because they are nourished on the breast of tyranny, suck in with their milk the instincts of the tyrant, and consider the people under them as their inherited serfs. And according to their individual disposition, miserly or prodigal, they treat their kingdom as their property. He who has received the state from the people, however, ought to be, it seems to me, more bearable, and would be so, I think, were it not for the fact that as soon as he sees himself higher than the others, flattered by the quality which we call grandeur, he plans never to relinquish his position. Such a man usually determines to pass on to his children the authority that the people have conferred upon him. And once his heirs have taken this attitude, strange it is how far they surpass other tyrants in all sorts of vices, and especially in cruelty, because they find no other means to impose this new tyranny than by tightening control and removing their subjects so far from any notion of liberty that even if the memory of it is fresh, it will soon be eradicated. Yet, to speak accurately, I do perceive that there is some difference among these three types of tyranny, but as for stating a preference, I cannot grant there is any. For although the means of coming into power differ, still the method of ruling is practically the same. Those who are elected, that is interesting. The means of coming into power differ, still the method of ruling is practically the same. Those who are elected act as if they were breaking in bullocks. Those who are conquerors make the people their prey. Those who are heirs plan to treat them as if they were their natural slaves. In connection with this, let us imagine some newborn individuals, neither acquainted with slavery nor desirous of liberty, ignorant indeed of the very words. If they were permitted to choose between being slaves and freemen, to which would they give their vote? There can be no doubt that they would much prefer to be guided by reason itself than to be ordered about by the whims of a single man. The only possible exception might be the Israelites who, without any compulsion or need, appointed a tyrant. I can never read their history without becoming angered, really, and even inhuman enough to find satisfactions in the many evils that befell them on this account. But certainly all men, as long as they remain men, before letting themselves become enslaved, must either be driven by force or led into by deception, conquered by foreign armies, as were Sparta and Athens, by the forces of Alexander, or by political factions, as when at earlier period the control of Athens had passed into the hands of Pisistrates. Pisistrates. That's an interesting name, huh? I'm probably mispronouncing it, but anyway, when they lose their liberty through deceit, they are not so often betrayed by others as misled by themselves, and I think that's really happening right now. I would like to save some quotes. Because
nobody really takes your rights. You can only give up your rights, but you can't give them away. But you're the one who gives them up.
This was the case with the people of Syracuse, chief city of Sicily. I am told the place is now named Saragossa. When in the throes of war and heedlessly planning only for the present danger, they promoted Denis, their first tyrant, by entrusting to him the command of the army, without realizing that they had given him such power that on his victorious return this worthy man would behave as if he had vanquished not his enemies but his compatriots, transforming himself from captain to king, and then from king to tyrant. It is incredible how as soon as people become subject, it promptly falls into such complete forgetfulness of its freedom that it can hardly be roused to the point of regaining it, obeying so easily and so willingly that one is led to say on beholding such a situation that this people has not so much lost its liberty as won its enslavement. It is true that in the beginning men submit under constraint and by force, but those who come after them obey without regret and perform willingly what their predecessors had done because they had to. This is why men born under the yoke and then nourished and reared in slavery are content, without further effort, to live in their native circumstance, unaware of any other state or right, and considering as quite natural the condition into which they were born. I want to talk about that later. Because
you should be posting these into like a Word document or something, or Paint.
Yeah, I didn't open it ahead of time, so I got this. All right. So I want to talk about that later because sunset clauses on laws. If politicians spent the majority of their time repassing laws instead of creating new ones, I think you would have a lot less tyranny. And this is something Jefferson suggested. Elon Musk has suggested a form of this, and I think it's great. Anyway, back to the reading. There is, however, no heir so spendthrift or indifferent that he does not sometimes scan the accounts of books of his father in order to see if he is enjoying all the privileges of his legacy, or whether, perchance, his rights and those of his predecessor have not been encroached upon. Nevertheless, it is clear enough that the powerful influence of custom is in no respect more compelling than in this, namely habituation to subjection. Yep. It is said that Mithridates trained himself to drink poison. Like him, we learn to swallow, and not to find bitter, the venom of servitude. It cannot be denied that nature is influential in shaping us to her will, and making us reveal our rich or meager endowment. Yet it must be admitted that she has less power over us than custom, for the reason that native endowment, no matter how good, is dissipated unless encouraged, whereas environment always shapes us in its own way, whatever that may be, in spite of nature's gifts. The good seed that nature plants in us is so slight and so slippery that it cannot withstand the least harm from wrong nourishment. It flourishes less easily, becomes spoiled, withers, and comes to nothing. Fruit trees retain their own particular quality if permitted to grow undisturbed, but lose it promptly and bear strange fruit, not their own when engrafted. Every herb has its peculiar characteristics, its virtues and properties. Yet frost, weather, soil, or the gardener's hand increase or diminish its strength. The plant seen in one spot cannot be recognized in another. Whoever could have observed the early Venetians, a handful of people living so freely that the most wicked among them would not wish to be king over them, so born and trained that they could not vie with one another except as to which one could give the best counsel and nurture their liberty most carefully, so instructed and developed from their cradles that they would not exchange for all their delights of the world an iota of their freedom, who, I say, familiar with the original nature of such a people, could visit today the territories of the man known as the Great Doge. I don't know, that's Doge, and that's really interesting because of Dogecoin. But anyway, and there contemplate with composure a people unwilling to live except to serve him, and maintain his power at the cost of their lives. Who would believe that these two groups of people had an identical origin? Would one not rather conclude that leaving a city of men he had chanced upon a menagerie of beasts? Lycurgus, the lawgiver of Sparta, is reported to have reared 2 dogs of the same litter by fattening one in the kitchen and training the other in the fields to the sounds of the bugle and the horn, thereby to demonstrate to the Lacedaemonians that men, too, develop according to their early habits. He set the 2 dogs in the open marketplace, and between them he placed a bowl of soup and a hare. One ran to the bowl of soup, the other to the hare, yet they were, as he maintained, born brothers of the same parents. In such manner did this leader, by his laws and customs, shape and instruct the Spartans so well that any of them would sooner have died than acknowledge any sovereign other than law and reason. Damn. Isn't that fucking crazy?
Yeah, so he's talking about social engineering back in the 1500s. Like, and that's Pavlovian
yeah, no shit.
Conditioning or whatever.
I kind of want to recount that story, so I'm going to save that. Okay. It gives me pleasure to recall a conversation of the olden time between one of the favorite of Xerxes, the great king of Persia, and 2 Lacedaemonians. When Xerxes equipped his greater army to conquer Greece, he sent his ambassadors into the Greek cities to ask for water and earth. That was the procedure of the Persians, who adopted in summoning the cities to surrender. Neither to Athens nor to Sparta, however, did he dispatch such messengers, because those who had been sent there by Darius, his father, had been thrown by the Athenians and the Spartans, some into ditches and others into wells, with the invitation to help themselves freely there to the water and soil to take back to their prince. Those Greeks could not permit even the slightest suggestion of encroachment upon their liberty. The Spartans suspected, nevertheless, that they had incurred that they had incurred the wrath of the gods by their action, and especially the wrath of Tathabios, the god of the heralds, in order to appease him, that they decided to send Xerxes 2 of their citizens in atonement for the cruel death inflicted upon the ambassadors of his father. 2 Spartans, one named Sperti and another Bulis, volunteered to offer themselves as a sacrifice. So they departed, and on the way they came to the palace of the Persian Hydarnes, lieutenant of the king of all the Asiatic cities situated on the seacoast. He received them with great honor, feasted them, and then speaking of one thing and another, he asked them why they refused so obdurately his king's friendship. "Consider well, O Spartans," said he, and realize by example that the king knows how to honor those who are worthy, and believe that if you were his men, he would do the same for you. If you belonged to him, and he had known you, there is not one among you who might not be the lord of some Greek city. By such words, Hydarnes, you give us no good counsel, replied the Lacedaemonians, because you have experienced merely the advantage of which you speak. You do not know the privilege we enjoy. You have the honor of the king's favor, but you know nothing about liberty, what relish it has and how sweet it is. For if you had any knowledge of it, you yourself would advise us to defend it, not with lance and shield, but with our very teeth and nails. Only Spartans could give such an answer, and surely both of them spoke as they had been trained. It was impossible for the Persian to regret liberty, not having known it, nor for the Lacedaemonians to find subjection acceptable after having enjoyed freedom. Cato, the Utican, Cato the Utican, while still a child under the rod, could come and go in the house of Sylla the despot, because of the place and family of his origin, and because he and Sylla were close relatives. The door was never closed to him. He always had his teacher with him when he went there, as was the custom for children of noble birth. He noticed that in the house of Sylla, in the dictator's presence or at his command, some men were imprisoned and others sentenced. One was banished, another was strangled. One demanded the goods of another citizen, another his head. In short, all went there, not as to the house of a city magistrate, but as to the people's tyrant. And this was therefore not a court of justice, but rather a resort of tyranny. Whereupon the young lad said to his teacher, "Why don't you give me a dagger? I will hide it under my robe. I often go into Sylla's room before he has risen, and my arm is strong enough to rid the city of him." There is a speech truly characteristic of Cato. It was a true beginning of this hero so worthy of his end, and should one not mention his name or his country, but state merely the fact as it is, the episode itself would speak eloquently, and anyone would divine that he was a Roman born in Rome at the time when she was free. And why all this? Certainly not because I believe that the land or the region has anything to do with it, for in any place and in any climate subjection is bitter, and to be free is pleasant, but merely because I am of the opinion that one should pity those who at birth arrive with the yoke upon their necks. We should exonerate and forgive them, since they have not seen even the shadow of liberty, and being quite unaware of it, cannot perceive the evil endured through their own slavery. If there are actually a country like that of Cimmerians, mentioned by Homer, where the sun shines otherwise than on our own, shedding its radiance steadily for 6 successive months, and then leaving humanity to drowse in obscurity until it returns at the end of another half-year, should we be surprised to learn that those born during this long night do grow so accustomed to their native darkness that unless they were told about the sun, they would have no desire to see the light? One never pines for what he has never known. Longing comes only after enjoyment, and constitutes, amidst the experience of sorrow, the memory of past joy. Is truly the nature of a man to be free and to wish to be so. Yet his character is such that he instinctively follows the tendencies that his training gives him. Let us therefore admit that all those to which he is trained and accustomed seem natural to man, and that only that is truly native to him which he receives with his primitive, untrained individuality. Thus custom becomes the first reason for voluntary servitude.
Or culture. You can call it culture.
Yeah, exactly. Men are like handsome racehorses who first bite the bit and later like it, and rearing under the saddle, while soon learn to enjoy displaying their harness and prounce proudly beneath their trappings. Similarly, men will grow accustomed to the idea that they have always been in subjection, that their fathers lived in the same way. They will think that they are obliged to suffer this evil, and will persuade themselves by example and imitation of others, finally investing those who order them around with propriety rights based on the idea that it has always been that way. There are always a few better endowed than others, who feel the weight of the yoke and cannot restrain themselves from attempting to shake it off. These are the men who never become tamed under subjection, and who always, like Ulysses on land and sea, constantly seeking the smoke of his chimney, cannot prevent themselves from peering about their natural privileges and from remembering their ancestors and their former ways. These are in fact the men who, possessed of clear minds and far-sighted spirit, are not satisfied like the brutish mass to see only what is at their feet, but rather look about them, behind and before, and even recall the things of the past in order to judge those of the future, and compare both with their present condition. These are the ones who, having good minds of their own, have further trained them by study and learning. Even if liberty had entirely perished from the earth, such men would invent it. For them, slavery has no satisfactions, no matter how well disguised. The Grand Turk was well aware that books and teaching, more than anything else, give men the sense to comprehend their own nature and to detest tyranny. I understand that in his territory there are few educated people, for he does not want many. Well, shit. On account of this restriction, men of strong zeal and devotion, who in spite of the passing of time have preserved their love of freedom, still remain ineffective because, however numerous they may be, they are not known to one another. Under the tyrant they have lost freedom of action, of speech, and almost of thought. They are alone in their aspiration. Indeed, Momus, god of mockery, was not merely joking when he found this to criticize in the man fashioned by Vulcan, namely that the Maker had not set a little window in his creature's heart to render his thoughts visible. It is reported that Brutus, Cassius, and Casca, on undertaking to free Rome, for that matter the whole world, refused to include in their band Cicero, that great enthusiast for the public welfare if there ever was one, because they considered his heart too timid for such a lofty deed. They trusted his willingness, but they were none too sure of his courage. Yet whoever studies of the deeds of earlier days and the annals of antiquity will find practically no instance of heroes who failed to deliver their country from evil hands when they set about their task with a firm, wholehearted, and sincere intention. Liberty, as if to reveal her nature, seems to have given them new strength. Harmodius Aristogiton or something. I'm going to have trouble with these. Aristogiton. Thrasbulus, Brutus the Elder, Valerianus, Dion, achieves successfully what they planned virtuously, for hardly ever does good fortune fail a strong will. Brutus the Younger and Cassius were successful in eliminating servitude, and although they perished in their attempt to restore liberty, they did not die miserably. What blasphemy it would be to say that there was anything miserable about these men, either in their death or in their living. Their loss worked great harm, everlasting misfortune, and complete destruction of the Republic, which appears to have been buried with them. Other and later undertakings against the Roman emperors were merely plottings of ambitious people, who deserved no pity for the misfortunes that overtook them, for it is evidence that they sought not to destroy, but merely to usurp the crown, scheming to drive away the tyrant, but to retain tyranny. For myself, the revolution, revolving doors. For myself, I could not wish such men to prosper, and I am glad that they have shown by their example that the sacred name of liberty must never be used to cover a false enterprise. But to come back to the thread of our discourse, which I have practically lost. The essential reason why men take orders willingly is that they are born serfs and are reared as such. Tax farm. For this cause there follows another result, namely that people easily become cowardly and submissive under tyrants. For this observation I am deeply grateful to Hippocrates, the renowned father of medicine, who noted and reported it in a treatise of his entitled Concerning Diseases. This famous man was certainly endowed with a great heart, and proved it clearly by his reply to the great king, who wanted to attach him to his person by means of special privileges and large gifts. Hippocrates answered frankly that it would be a weight on his conscience to make use of his science for the cure of barbarians who wished to slay his fellow Greeks, or to serve faithfully by his skill anyone who undertook to enslave Greece. This letter he sent the king can still be read among his other works, and will forever testify to his great heart and noble character. Interesting. He just takes a thing to do a shout out to my boy Hippocrates. Hold on, I want to save that quote. Okay.
I've seen Hippocrates in a lot of different works, and so it's he must be a really famous character in the Greek. Is he a Greek god?
No, he's the father of medicine. He's a man.
But he was an actual person?
He's a human being who wrote books and shit. And, yeah. Anyway, he said, let food be thy medicine. It's a famous quote of Hippocrates.
Okay.
Alright. Anyway. So, by this time it should be evident that liberty once lost, valor also perishes. A subject people shows neither gladness nor eagerness in combat. Its men march sullenly to danger, almost as if in bonds, and stultified, they do not feel throbbing within them that eagerness for liberty, which engenders scorn of peril, and imparts readiness to acquire honor and glory by a brave death amidst one's comrades. Among free men there is competition as to who will do most, each for the common good, each by himself, all expecting to share in the misfortunes of defeat or in the benefits of victory. But an enslaved people loses, in addition to its warlike courage, all signs of enthusiasm, for their hearts are degraded, submissive, and incapable of any great deed. Tyrants are well aware of this, and in order to degrade their subjects further, encourage them to assume this attitude and make it instinctive. Xenophon, grave historian of first rank among the Greeks, wrote a book in which he makes Simonides speak with Hieron, tyrant of Syracuse, concerning the anxieties of the tyrant. This book is full of fine and serious remonstrances, which in my opinion are as persuasive as words can be. Would to God that all despots who have ever lived might have kept it before their eyes and used it as a mirror. Interesting. I want to read this sometime. I cannot believe... Let's save that so I can remember to look it up. I cannot believe they would have failed to recognize their warts and to have conceived some shame for their blotches. In this treatise is explained the torment in which tyrants find themselves when obliged to fear everyone because they do evil unto every man. Among other things, we find the statement that bad kings employ foreigners in their wars and pay them, not daring to entrust weapons in the hands of their own people whom they have wronged. There have been good kings who have used mercenaries from foreign nations, even among the French, although so formerly than today, but with the quite different purpose of preserving their own people, considering as nothing the loss of money in the effort to spare French lives. That is, I believe, what Scipio, the great African, meant when he said he would rather save one citizen than defeat 100 enemies. For it is plainly evident that the dictator does not consider his power firmly established until he has reached the point where there is no man under him who is of any worth. Therefore, there may be justly applied to him the reproach of the master of elephants, who by Thracian and reported by Terrace. I think this is a quote of Xenophon. Are you indeed so proud because you command wild beasts? This method tyrants use of stultifying their subjects cannot be more clearly observed than in what Cyrus did with the Lydians after he had taken Sardis, their chief city, and had at his mercy the captured Croesus, their fabulously rich king. When news was brought to him that the people of Sardis had rebelled, it would have been easy for him to reduce them by force, but being unwilling either to sack such a fine city or to maintain an army there to police it, he thought of an unusual expedient for reducing it. He established it in brothels, taverns, and public games, and issued the proclamation that the inhabitants were to enjoy them. He found this type of garrison so effective, that he never again had to draw the sword against the Lydians. Jesus Christ, dude. Brothels, taverns, public games. These wretched people enjoyed themselves inventing all kinds of games, so that the Latins have derived the word from them. And what we call pastimes, they call ludi, as if they meant to say lidi. Not all tyrants have manifested so clearly their intention to effeminize their victims, but in fact what the aforementioned despot publicly proclaimed and put into effect, most of the others have pursued secretly as an end. It is indeed the nature of the populace. I'm gonna save that. It is indeed the nature of the populace whose density is always... Make sure I paste that over. Alright. It is indeed the nature of the populace whose density is always greater in the cities, to be suspicious towards one who has their welfare at heart, and gullible toward one who fools them. Do not imagine that there is any bird more easily caught by decoy, nor any fish sooner fixed on the hook by wormy bait, than are all those poor fools neatly tricked into servitude by the slightest feather pass, so to speak, before their mouths. Truly it is a marvelous thing that they let themselves be caught so quickly as the slightest tickling of their fancy. Plays, farces, spectacles, gladiators, strange beasts, medals, pictures, and other such opiates. These were, for ancient peoples, the bait towards slavery, the price of their liberty, the instruments of tyranny.
Wasn't it talking about games earlier?
Yeah.
Yeah, games. Yeah, like, here, play these games.
Well, do you know that, for example...
Don't worry about defending yourself.
The Persian Empire gave out free rations of wine to, like, newborn, to people who had just birthed a baby, to families, which is interesting. But, and, like, a lot of, like, that was another thing the Egyptians did with the Jews, and they had, a free supply of beer to the populace. Like, to where you spend all day slaving away, but we get you drunk. Like, which is, Anyway.
We give you your rewards. We give you your toys. Go play, children.
Yeah.
Don't worry about your slavery.
Don't worry about freedom. By these practices and enticements, the ancient dictators so successfully lulled their subjects under the yoke that the stupefied peoples, fascinated by the pastimes and vain pleasures flashed before their eyes, learned subservience as naively, but not so credibly, as little children learn to read by looking at bright picture books. Wow, that's exactly what... Roman tyrants invented a further refinement. They often provided the city wards with feasts to cajole the rabble, always more readily tempted by the pleasure of eating than by anything else. The most intelligent and understanding amongst them would not have quit his soup bowl to recover the liberty of the Republic of Plato. Tyrants would distribute largesse, a bushel of wheat, a gallon of wine, a sesterce, and then everybody would shamelessly cry, "Long live the king!" The fools did not realize that they were merely recovering a portion of their own liberty, and that their ruler... Property, thank you. And that their ruler could not have given them what they were receiving without having first taken it from them. Yeah. A man might one day be presented with a sesterce and gorge himself at the public feast, lauding Tiberius and Nero for handsome liberality, who on...
Tomorrow.
Yeah, hold on, I want to see if this is...
I was going to say something real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's weird how, they give you, the packaged experience for everything. Here's how you party. You have your alcohol, and you have, it's at this time of night, And
you have your plays, you have your gladiators, you have your... you have your games, you have your brothels.
Yeah, and, giving, here's
taverns.
Here's the approved package. You know what I mean? Like here, like from the adults to the kids, this is how you do it, kids. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to worry about like the way you might want to do it, or what your preferences are. No, it's this package. Like if you're gonna party, you drink alcohol, and you know, like.
Yeah, and it varies from place to place. And
like, this is how you enjoy wine. This is how you enjoy, you know, the beach. This is how you know what I mean? Everything is like a package approved by the adults. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like here you go. Here's to placate your pleasures and fantasies. We know your fantasies and pleasures better than you, so we put these packages together specifically designed to tour your tastes. So
Dude.
Here are your tastes.
If you ever watch toy ads from the 1960s, it is a mind fuck, dude. Like, I would love to do a reaction to that.
Oh, I know, right? Yeah, I know. I was
A
talking
reaction
about,
video to that. That might be upcoming at some
I was
point.
talking about that with my coworkers, like these commercials that people like. When I got that game, like for instance, the Ant Picnic, or the the Spin Fighters, or like what I mean, the Stratego, whatever, the fucking Connect 4. You always longed to have that commercial experience. You wanted to have like a family who loved you, or friends that were good friends that all gathered together to have a fun time doing something.
Yeah. Anyway,
yeah.
So, long live the king. The fools did not realize that they were merely recovering a portion of their own property. Oh, that's the part that I messed up. A man might one day be presented with a sesterce and gorge himself at the public feast, lauding Tiberius and Nero for handsome liberality, who on the morrow would be forced to abandon his property to avarice, his children to their lust, his very blood to the cruelty of these magnificent emperors, without offering any more resistance than a stone or a tree stump. The mob has always behaved in this way, eagerly open to bribes that cannot be honorably accepted, and dissolutely callous to degradation and insult that cannot be honorably endured. Nowadays, I do not meet anyone who, or hearing mention of Nero, does not shudder at the very name of that hideous monster, that disgusting and vile pestilence. Yet when he died, when this incendiary, this executioner, this savage beast died as vilely as he had lived, the noble Roman people, mindful of his games and his festivals, were saddened to the point of wearing mourning for him. Thus wrote Cornelius Tacitus, a competent and serious author, and one of the most reliable. This will not be considered peculiar in the views of what the same people had previously done at the death of Julius Caesar, who had swept away their laws and their liberty, in whose character it seems to me there is nothing worthwhile, for his very liberality, which so highly praised, was more baneful than the crudest tyrant who ever existed, because it was actually the poisonous amiability of his that sweetened servitude for the Roman people. After his death, that people still preserving on their palates the flavor of his banquets, and in their minds the memory of prodigality, vied with one another to pay him homage. They piled up the seats of the forum for the great fire that reduced his body to ashes, and later raised a column to him as to the father of his people, such as was the inscription on the Capitol. They did him more honor, dead as he was, than they had any right to confer upon any man in the world, except perhaps on those who had killed him. They didn't even neglect, these Roman emperors, to assume generally the title of tribune of the people, partly because this office was held sacred and inviolable, and also because it had been founded for the defense and protection of the people and enjoyed the favor of the state. By this means, they made sure that the populace would trust them completely, as if they merely used the title and did not abuse it. Today, there are some who do not behave very differently. They never undertake an unjust policy, even one of some importance, without prefacing it with some pretty speech concerning public welfare and common good. You know well, O Longa, this formula which they use cleverly in certain places, although for the most part, to be sure, they cannot be cleverness where there is so much impudence. The kings of the Assyrians, and even even after them of the Medes showed themselves in public as seldom as possible in order to set up a doubt in the minds of the rabble as to whether they were not in some way more than man, and thereby to encourage people to use their imagination for those things which they cannot judge by sight. Thus, a great many nations for a long time dwelt under the control of the Assyrians, became accustomed, with all its mystery, to their own subjection, and submitted the more readily for not knowing what sort of master they had, or scarcely even if they had one, all of them fearing by report someone they had never seen. The earliest kings of Egypt rarely showed themselves without carrying a cat, or sometimes a branch, or appearing with fire on their heads, masking them with these objects and parading like workers of magic. By doing this, they inspired their subjects with reverence and admiration, whereas with people neither too stupid nor too slavish, they would merely have aroused, it seems to me, amusement and laughter. It is pitiful to review the list of devices that early despots used to establish their tyranny, to discover how many little tricks they employed, always finding the populace conveniently gullible, readily caught in the net as soon as it was spread. Indeed, they always fool their victims so easily that while mocking them, they enslave them the more. What comment can I make concerning another fine counterfeit than ancient peoples accept it as true money? They believe firmly that the great toe of Pyrrhus, king of Epirus, performed miracles and cured diseases of the spleen. They even enhanced the tale further with the legend that this toe, after the corpse had been burned, was found among the ashes, untouched by the fire. In this wise, a foolish people itself invents lies and then believes them. Many men have recounted such things, but in such a way that it is easy to see that the parts were pieced together from idle gossip of the city and silly reports from the rabble. When Vespasian, returning from Assyria, passes through Alexandria on his way to Rome to take possession of the empire, he performs wonders. He makes the crippled straight, restores sight to the blind, and does many other fine things, concerning which the credulous and undiscriminating were, in my opinion, more blind than those cured. Tyrants themselves have wondered that men could endure the persecution of a single man. They have insisted on using religion for their own protection, and where possible, have borrowed a stray bit of divinity to bolster up their evil ways. If we are to believe the Sibyl of Virgil, Salmoneus, in torment for having paraded as Jupiter in order to deceive the populace, now atones in nethermost hell. He suffered endless torment for having dared to imitate the thunderbolts of heaven and the flames of Jupiter. Upon a chariot drawn by 4 chargers he went, unsteadily, riding aloft in his fist a great shining torch. Among the Greeks and into the marketplace in the heart of the city of Elis he had ridden boldly, and displaying thus his vainglory he assumed an honor which undeniably belongs to the gods alone. This fool who imitated storm and the inimitable thunderbolt by clash of brass with his dizzying charge on horn-hoof steeds and all-powerful father beheld, hurled not a torch, nor the feeble light from a waxen taper with its smoky fumes, but by the furious blast of thunder and lightning he brought him low, his heels above his head. If such a one, who in his time acted merely through the folly of insolence, and so well received in hell, I think that those who have used religion as a cloak to hide their vileness will be even more deservedly lodged in the same place. Agreed. Our own leaders have employed in France certain similar devices, such as toads, fleur-de-lis, sacred vessels, and standards with flames of gold. However that may be, I do not wish for my part to be incredulous, since neither we nor our ancestors have had any occasion up to now for skepticism. Our kings have always been so generous in times of peace, and so valiant in time of war, that from birth they seem not to have created by nature like many others, but even before birth to have been designated by Almighty God for the government and preservation of this kingdom. Even if this were not so, yet should I not enter the tilting ground to call in question the truth of our traditions, or to examine them so strictly as to take away their fine conceits. Here is such a field for our French poetry, now not merely honored, but it seems to me reborn through our Ronsard, our Baif, our Belay. These poets are defending our language so well that I dare to believe that very soon neither the Greeks nor the Latins will in this respect have any advantage over us except possibly that of seniority. Wow, nice guy. And I should assuredly do wrong to our poesy. I like to use that word despite the fact that several have rhymed mechanically. For I still discern a number of men today capable of ennobling poetry and restoring to its first luster. But, as I say, I should do the muse great injury if I deprived her now of those fine tales about King Clovis, amongst which it seems to me I can already see how agreeably and how happily the inspiration of our Ronsard in his Franciade will play. I appreciate his loftiness, I am aware of his keen spirit, and I know the charm of the man. He will appropriate the oriflamme, to use much as did the Romans their sacred bucklers, and the shields cast from heaven to earth, according to Virgil. He will use our phial of holy oil, much as the Athenians used the basket of Erichthonius. He will win applause for our deeds of valor, as they did for their olive wreath, which they insist can still be found in Minerva's tower. Certainly I should be preposterous if I tried to cast slurs on our records and thus invade the realm of our poets. But to return to our subject, which I have unwittingly lost in this discussion, it has always happened that tyrants, in order to strengthen their power, have made every effort to train their people, not only in obedience and servility toward themselves, but also in adoration. Therefore, all that I have said up to the present concerning the means by which a more willing submission has been obtained applies to dictators in their relationship with the inferior and common classes.
No shit.
Yeah, no.
That last part was just like stating that.
Yeah, for sure.
How many parts are there to this?
There's only 3. God, dear Jesus. All right, so let's.
If there's only one more, I can handle one more.
Yeah, this is the last one. So
yeah,
3 parts.
Yeah, I can do it.
We asked for, again, we're reading Discourse of Voluntary Servitude, written in 1576 by Étienne de La Boétie, a French liberty writer. And we're reacting to it. We're going to have, getting some quotes together here, and after part 3, we're going to talk about how each of these apply to our modern situation, and, what we agree and disagree with, posted here. I want to get a quote on also in adoration. This is important because they use propaganda. They use patriotism as the guide, as the cloak to cloak the state in a veil of religiosity and grandeur and amazingness that has you bow down to tyrants. And that is the very thing that is used by tyrants, and I believe this is what he probably gets into.
Wow, it's like he's really talking about the fact that people can't avoid they can't avoid the fact that they are choosing to abide by tyrants. I mean, because you could say that they're religious, they think that they're obeying God, or that obeying that they're good. You know what I mean? But regardless of what they believe and what their religion is, what they reverently believe, they're still bowing down to tyrants. They're still bowing their head to a bully.
Yeah.
And they can't escape that. But regardless of what you believe, that's what you're doing.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, exactly. Voluntary servitude. Voluntary slavery. All right, part 3. I'm gonna get a drink of tea.
You can have a million excuses, but you still know what you're doing.
Absolutely. All right. I come now to a point which is, in my opinion, the mainspring and the secret of domination, the support and foundation of tyranny. Whoever thinks that halberds, sentries, and the placing of the watch serve to protect and shield tyrants is, in my judgment, completely mistaken. These are used, it seems to me, more for ceremony and a show of force than for any reliance placed in them. The archers forbid the entrance to the palace to the poorly dressed who have no weapons, not to the well-armed who carry out some plot. Certainly it is easy to say of the Roman emperors that fewer escaped from danger by the aid of their guards than were killed by their own archers. It is not the troop on horseback, it is not the companies afoot, it is not arms that defend the tyrant. Ooh, I like this. This does not seem credible on first thought, but it is nevertheless true that there are only 4 or 5 who maintain the dictator, 4 or 5 who keep the country in bondage to him. 5 or 6 have always had access to his ear, and have either gone to him of their own accord, or else have summoned by him to be accomplices in his cruelties, companions to his pleasures, panders to his lust, and sharers in his plunders. These 6 manage their chief so successfully that he comes to be held accountable, not only for his own misdeeds, but even for theirs. The 6 have 600 who profit under them, and with the 600 they do what they have accomplished with their tyrant. The 600 maintain under them 6,000, whom they promote in rank, upon whom they confer the government of provinces or the direction of finances, in order that they may serve as instruments of avarice and cruelty, executing orders at the proper time and working such havoc all around that they could not last long under the shadow of the 600, nor be exempt from law and punishment, except through their influence. The consequence of all this is fatal indeed. And whoever is pleased to unwind the skein will observe that not the 6,000, but 100,000, and even millions, cling to the tyrant by this cord to which they are tied. According to Homer, Jupiter boasts of being able to draw to himself all the gods when he pulls a chain. Such a scheme caused the increase in the Senate under Julius, the formation of new ranks, the creation of offices, not really, if properly considered, to reform justice, but to provide new supporters of despotism. In short, when the point is reached through big favors or little ones, that large profits or small are obtained under a tyrant, there are found almost as many people to whom tyranny seems advantageous as those to whom liberty would be desirable. Doctors declare...
Would seem desirable, yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Doctors declare that if when some part of the body has gangrene, a disturbance arises in another spot, it immediately follows the troubled part. Even so... Man, these sentences, huh? When a ruler makes himself a dictator, all the wicked dregs of a nation, I do not mean the pack of petty thieves and earless ruffians who in a republic are unimportant in evil or good, but all those who are corrupted by burning ambition or extraordinary avarice. These gather round him and support him in order to have a share in the booty and to constitute themselves petty chiefs under the big tyrant. This is the practice among notorious robbers and famous pirates. Yeah, and gangs. Some scour the country, others pursue voyagers, some lie in ambush, others keep a lookout, some commit murder, others robbery, and although there are among them differences in rank, some being only underlings, while others are chieftains of gangs. Of gangs. Yet there is not a single one among them who does not feel himself to be a sharer, if not of the main booty, at least in the pursuit of it. It is dependably related that Sicilian pirates gathered in such great numbers that it became necessary to send against them Pompey the Great, and that they drew into their alliance fine towns and great cities in whose harbors they took refuge on returning from their expeditions, paying handsomely for the haven given their stolen goods. Thus the despot subdues his subjects, some of them by means of others, and thus is he protected by those from whom, if they were decent men, he would have to guard himself, just as, in order to split wood, one has to use a wedge of the wood itself. Such are his archers, his guards, his halberds. Not that they themselves do not suffer occasionally at his hands, but this riffraff, abandoned alike by God and man, can be led to endure evil if permitted to commit it, not against him who exploits them, but against those who, like themselves, submit, but are helpless. Nevertheless, observing those men who painfully serve the tyrant in order to win some profit from his tyranny and from the subjection of the populace, I am often undercome with amazement at their wickedness, and sometimes by pity for their folly. For in all honesty, can it be any way except in folly that you approach a tyrant, withdrawing further from your liberty, and so to speak, embracing with both hands your servitude? Let such men lay aside briefly their ambition, or let them forget for a moment that their avarice, and look at themselves as they really are. Then they will realize clearly that the townspeople, the peasants, whom they trample underfoot and treat worse than convicts or slaves, they will realize, I say, that these people, mistreated as they may be, are nevertheless, in comparison with themselves, better off and fairly free. The tiller of the soil and the artisan, no matter how enslaved, discharge their obligation when they do what they are told to do. But the dictator sees men about him wooing and begging his favor, and doing much more than he tells them to do. Such men must not only obey orders, they must anticipate his wishes. To satisfy him, they must foresee his desires. They must wear themselves out, torment themselves, kill themselves with work in his interest, and accept his pleasure as their own, neglecting their preferences for his, distorting their character and corrupting their nature. They must pay heed to his words, to his intonation, to his gestures, and to his glance. Let them have no eye, nor foot, nor hand that is not alert to respond to his wishes or to seek out his thoughts.
Yeah, because they're terrified of looking at their own thoughts and desires and dealing with that.
Yeah.
I was also gonna say, you can tell who's like more. You can really tell who's the most brainwashed, religious about the state by how people act around police. How people are like, oh, thank you for your service. I really appreciate what you do, man. I really appreciate it. You're a hero. People don't get it. People want to say shit about you guys, but I know the truth. You guys are heroes. You're a hero.
Yeah. And, I like to ask people in certain circumstances like that, like a question, like, if you want to thank me for my service, punch a politician or vote a tyrant out of office, and voting, I don't say vote. I've never said that. I'm just saying, I have all these reactions in my mind, and I say some of them, or I just say, don't thank me too much, man. I was just working for our politicians. I was just a hired thug,
I used to do security at a checkpoint at, events before COVID.
Yeah.
And people would thank me. Thank you for keeping us all safe.
Hey, you never know. Actually, private security, I support that a little bit. You're willing at least to put to be targeted.
This is 9/11's TSA style.
Oh,
checkpoints.
yeah. Jeez.
We're you know what I mean?
Really? That bad?
We're wanding people and we're checking their bags. And it's like, thank you for protecting us.
Yeah. Interesting. I didn't know you participate in that, doing security jobs.
Yeah, because I like going to events, and I also like hanging out with rent-a-cops, because they're in some ways they're more religious and more I don't know. It's like I get to have first-hand experience with order followers, but without actually being an order follower.
You should try to get some interviews. Anyway, let's finish this up and talk about all this. All right, looking forward to the reaction. All right, and we've been reacting a little bit as we go, I suppose. End of part 3. What condition is more wretched than to live thus with... Oh, I skipped this part. Can that be called a happy life? Can it be called living? Is there anything more intolerable than that situation? I won't say for a man of metal, nor even for a man of high birth, but simply for a man of common sense, or to go even further, for anyone having the face of a man. What condition is more wretched than to live thus, with nothing to call one's own, receiving from someone else one's sustenance, one's power to act, one's body, one's very life? Still men accept servility in order to acquire wealth, as if they could acquire anything of their own, when they cannot even assert that they belong to themselves, or as if anyone could possess under a tyrant a single thing in his own name, yet they act as if their wealth really belonged to them. They act as if their wealth really belonged to them and forget that it is they themselves who give the ruler the power to deprive everybody of everything, leaving nothing that can identify as belonging to somebody. And that's the same thing with our property today. Like, do we own our property? We pay rent to the government for it. Do we own, our bodies? Do we own, are we allowed to decide what we put in our bodies? Well, we got the drug war, you just keep going down the list.
I mean, everything that's happened, though, hasn't changed that.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. They notice that nothing makes men so subservient to a tyrant's cruelty as property. Oh, that's what we were just talking about. That the possession of wealth is the worst of crimes against him, punishable even by death, that he loves nothing quite so much as money and ruins only the rich, who come before him as before a butcher, offering themselves so stuffed and bulging that they make his mouth water. These favorites should not recall so much the memory of those who have won great wealth from tyrants, as those who, after they had it for some time amassed it, have lost to him their property as well as their lives. They should consider not how many others have gained a fortune, but rather how few of them have kept it. Whether we examine ancient history or simply the times in which we live, we shall see clearly how great it is the number of those who, having by shameful means won the ear of princes, who either profit of their villainies or take advantage of their naivete, were in the end reduced to nothing by these very princes, and although at first such servitors were met by a ready willingness to promote their interest, they later found an equally obvious inconstancy which brought them to ruin. Certainly among so large a number of people who have at one time or another had some relationship with bad rulers, there have been few or practically none at all who have not felt applied to themselves the tyrant's animosity which they had formerly stirred up against others, most often after becoming rich by despoiling others. Under the favor of his protection, they find themselves at last enriching him with their own spoils. Even men of character, if it sometimes happens that a tyrant likes such a man well enough to hold him in his good graces, because in him shine forth the virtue and integrity that inspire a certain reverence even in the most depraved, even men of character, I say, could not long avoid succumbing to the common malady, and would early experience the effects of tyranny at their own expense. A Seneca, a Burrus, a Thracia, this triumvirate of splendid men will provide a sufficient reminder of such misfortune. Two of them were close to the tyrant by the fatal responsibility of holding in their hands the management of his affairs, and both were esteemed and beloved by him. One of them, moreover, had a peculiar claim upon his friendship, having instructed his master as a child. Yet these three, by their cruel death, give sufficient evidence of how little faith one can place in the friendship of an evil ruler. Indeed, what friendship may be expected from those whose heart is bitter enough to hate even his own people, who does not else but obey him? It is because he... 420. Where are we here? It is because he does not know how to solve that he ultimately impoverishes his own spirit and destroys his own empire. Now, if one would argue that these men fell into disgrace because they wanted to act honorably, you mind reading this last part? It's like 1, 2, 3. All right, do you want to just do 3 paragraphs?
Are you going to be here? Are you going to go out of the room?
I'm going to just be here, yeah.
Okay, sure, yes.
This one right here. Even my character. Just 3 paragraphs, Jared. We're almost done.
Okay.
All right, about to react.
You want to check the chat?
It's 420.
Oh, okay. Oh, you gotta load it.
Yeah. You don't have to tell me on recording anything.
Even men of character, if it is sometimes happens that a tyrant likes such a man well enough to hold him in his good graces, because in him shine forth the virtue and integrity that inspire a certain reverence even in the most depraved. Even men of character, I say, could not long avoid succumbing to the common malady, and would early experience the effects of tyranny at their own expense. At Seneca, a Burrus, a Thracia, this
triumvirate of splendid men will provide a sufficient reminder of such misfortune. 2 of them were close to the tyrant by the fatal responsibility of holding in his hands the management of his affairs, and both were esteemed and beloved by him. One of them, moreover, had a peculiar claim upon his friendship, having instructed his master as a child. Yet these 3, by their cruel death, give sufficient evidence of how little faith one can place in the friendship of an evil ruler. Indeed, what friendship may be experienced from one whose heart is bitter enough to hate even his own people, who do not else but obey him? It is because he does not know how to love that he ultimately impoverishes his own spirit and destroys his own empire. It is because he does not know how to love that he ultimately impoverishes his own spirit and destroys his own empire. Yeah, because how can you love when you're treating people like that? Now, if one would argue that these men fell into disgrace because they wanted to act honorably, let him look around boldly at others close to that same tyrant, and he will see that those who came into his favor and maintained themselves by dishonorable means did not fare much better. Who has ever heard tell of a love more centered, of an affection more persistent? Who has ever read of a man more desperately attached to a woman than Nero was to Poppaea? Yet she was later poisoned by his own hand. Agrippina, his mother, had killed her husband, Claudius, in order to exalt her son. To gratify him, she had never hesitated at doing or bearing anything. And yet this very son, her offspring, her emperor, elevated by her hand, after failing her often, finally took her life. It is indeed true that no one denies she would have well deserved this punishment, if only it had come to her by some other hand than that of the son she had brought into the world. Who was ever more easily managed, more naive, or, to speak quite frankly, a greater simpleton than Claudius the emperor? Who was ever more wrapped up in his wife than he in Messalina, whom he delivered finally into the hands of the executioner? Stupidity in a tyrant always renders him incapable of benevolent action, but in some mysterious way, by dint of acting cruelly even toward those who are his closest associates, he seems to manifest what little intelligence he may have.
All right, you mind if I do the rest?
Yeah, sure.
Muchas gracias. All right. Quite generally known is the striking phrase of that other tyrant who, gazing at the throat of his wife, a woman he dearly loved and without whom it seemed he could not live, caressed her with his charming comment, "This lovely throat would be cut at once if I but gave the order." End quote. That is why the majority of the dictators of former days were commonly slain by their closest favorites, who, observing the nature of tyranny, could not be so confident of the whim of the tyrant as they were distrustful of his power. Thus was Domitian killed by Stephen, Commodus by one of his mistresses, Antoninus by Macrinus, and practically all the others in similar violent fashion. In fact, the fact is that the tyrant is never truly loved, nor does he love. Friendship is a sacred word, a holy thing. It is never developed except between persons of character, and never takes root except through mutual respect. It flourishes not so much kindness, but as by sincerity.
Yeah.
And I would love to save that.
Yeah, for
quote.
sure. Because kindness can be faked.
Yep. What makes one friend sure of another is the knowledge of his integrity, as guarantees he has his friend's fine nature, his honor, and his constancy. There can be no friendship where there is cruelty, where there is disloyalty, where there is injustice. And in places where the wicked gather, there is conspiracy only, not companionship. These have no affection for one another. Fear alone holds them together. They are not friends. They are merely accomplices. Although it might not be impossible, yet it would be difficult to find true friendship in a tyrant. Elevated above others, and having no companions, he finds himself already the pale of friendship, which receives its sustenance from all equality, and to proceed without a limp must have its two limbs equal. That is why there is honor among thieves, or so it is reported, in the sharing of booty. They are peers and comrades. If they are not fond of one another, they at least respect one another and do not seek to lessen their strength by squabbling. But the favorites of a tyrant can never feel entirely secure, and less so because he has learned from them that he is all-powerful and unlimited by any law or obligation. Thus it becomes his wont to consider his own will as reason enough, and to be master of all with never a compeer.
You know what that reminds me of?
What?
The Emperor's New Groove.
Yeah, good point.
And at the end, like he buys them a house, and they go and he becomes what, like the king's advisor or something. So like
favorite of the king, like he was talking about earlier.
He just becomes a favorite of the king, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Oh shit! I forgot where I left off here. Oh yeah, compeer. Therefore, it seems a pity that with so many examples at hand, with the danger always present, no one is anxious to act the wise man at the expense of the others, and that among so many persons fawning upon their ruler, there is not a single one who has the wisdom and the boldness to say to him what, according to the fable, the fox said to the lion who feigned illness. I should be glad to enter your lair to pay my respects, but I see many tracks of beasts that have gone toward you, yet not a single trace of any who have come back. That's a quote. Damn. These wretches see the glint of the despot's treasures, and are bedazzled by the radiance of his splendor. Drawn by this brilliance, they come near, without realizing they are approaching a flame that cannot fail to scorch them. Similarly attracted, the indiscreet satyr of the old fables, on seeing the bright fire brought down by Prometheus, found it so beautiful that he went and kissed it, and was burned. So as the Tuscan poet reminds us, the moth, intent upon desire, seeks the flame, because it shines, and also experiences its other quality, the burning. Moreover, even admitting that favorites may at times escape from the hands of him they serve, they are never safe from the ruler who comes after him. If he is good, they must render an account of their past, and recognize at last that justice exists. If he is bad, and resembles their late master, he will certainly have his own favorites, who are not usually satisfied to occupy in their turn merely the posts of their predecessors, but will more often insist on their wealth and their lives. Can anyone be found, then, who under such perilous circumstances, and with so little security, will still be ambitious to fill such an ill-fated position, and serve, despite such perils, so dangerous a master? Good God, what suffering, what martyrdom all this involves, to be occupied night and day in planning to please one person, and yet to fear him more than anyone else in the world, to be always on the watch, ears open, wondering whence the blow will come, to search out conspiracy, to be on guard against snares, to scan the faces of companions for signs of treachery, to smile at everybody and be mortally afraid of all, to be sure of nobody, either as an open enemy or as a reliable friend, showing always a gay countenance despite an apprehensive heart, and able to be joyous, yet not daring to be sad. I would love to save that just to think about.
They're the ones who don't turn you in, right?
Well, we'll come back to that. I'll save it and we'll review it. However, there's satisfaction from examining what they get out of all this torment. What advantage they derive from all the trouble of their wretched existence. Actually, the people never blame the tyrant for the evils they suffer, but they do place responsibility on those who influence him. Peoples, nations, all compete with one another, even the peasants, even the tillers of the soil, in mentioning the names of the favorites, in analyzing their vices, and heaping upon them 1,000 insults, 1,000 obscenities, 1,000 maledictions. All their prayers, all their vows are directed against these persons. They hold them accountable for all their misfortunes, their pestilences, their famines, and if at times they show them outward respect, at those very moments they are fuming in their hearts and hold them in greater horror than wild beasts. This is the glory and honor heaped upon influential favorites for their services by people who, if they could tear apart their living bodies, would still clamor for more, only half satiated by the agony they might behold. For even when the favorites are dead, those who live are never too lazy to blacken the names of these man-eaters with the ink of 1,000 pens, tear their reputation into bits in 1,000 books, and drag, so to speak, their bones past posterity, forever punishing them after their death for their wicked lives. Let us thereafter learn while there is yet time. Let us learn to do good. Last paragraph, Jared. Jesus. Alright, I'm going to do this part slow. Let us therefore learn while there is yet time. Let us learn to do good. Let us raise our eyes to heaven for the sake of our honor, for the very love of virtue, or to speak wisely, for the love and praise of God Almighty, who is the infallible witness of our deeds and the just judge of our faults. As for me, I truly believe I am right, since there is nothing so contrary to a generous and loving God as dictatorship. I believe he has reserved in a separate spot in hell some very special punishment for tyrants and their accomplices. Well, that's how he signed out. Honestly, the end of part 1 was the best sign out there is, and that might be where we start our discussion.
Do you really think there's
so that's the end. Done reading.
Do you really think that there's justice for tyrants though?
4:33 p.m. Arizona.
Besides just like the fact that they're not loved, it's like they trade all their pleasures and hedonism and greed for never being loved and never loving, pretty much.
Yeah.
So it's like that's their justice. They don't really get punishment in the end. They just die.
So this first part. So asking you not to place hand upon the tyrant to topple him over, but that you just don't support him. That you don't support, tyrannies and their laws and their unjust actions. I say that because Étienne was a civil disobedience writer. He became one of the earliest advocates of civil disobedience and nonviolent resistance. Rothbard summarizes his political philosophy as follows: To him, the great mystery of politics was obedience to rulers. Why in the world do people agree to be looted and otherwise oppressed by government overlords? It is not just fear, but what he explains in the Discourse on Voluntary Servitude, for our consent is required. And that consent can be non-violently withdrawn. And that's the thing about this, is like anarchism, voluntarism, a belief in no rulers, is not necessarily saying that there's no structure or whatever, and that people in certain areas may, have what they want. Is the refusal to bow down to tyrannies, to rulership, to servitude, to where your ruler, or even a mass of rulers, a collective rulership, rules, is in charge of your property, is in charge of anything, as long as you're not hurting another person. And that's not talked about as much here in this discourse, but that's the concepts of the non-aggression principle and lots of other things. Jared, thoughts on that, the non-aggression principle, and this? I don't know if you want to read this for yourself, or should I read this quote that we're kind of discussing?
Resolve to serve no more, and you are at once freed. I do not ask that you place hands upon the tyrant and top him over, but simply support him no longer. Yeah.
Serve no more.
Yeah.
Support them no longer.
Don't stop giving them money.
Yeah.
Okay. Stop giving them money for God's sake, and fuck them if they want to come after you for it.
Yeah, I mean,
and for me, like, I always would I'd rather die fighting the police than be captured alive. You know what I mean? So like, you have to. It's like, sorry, it's time to fucking man up and not be a coward anymore, and like, you realize that freedom is more important than living.
And he's saying the police because who in our modern day would be enforcing this on the people? A lot of modern police say they wouldn't do some of these things, but it's been the military and policing forces that, you know, enforce the most abject aspects of fascism and communism and, you know, the dictatorship of the proletariat, you know, in the Soviet Union, where, you know, 40 million plus were murdered by their own government, and the hundreds of millions in China. These people, Hitler didn't kill himself with his own hands, a single fucking person. And this is something Étienne talks about here. He talks about it with a king, and him having 6 close people, and then that has, and he's like, do you notice that he's doing 666?
Yeah.
He's like 6, and then, you know, 60, and then 600, and then 6,000. I don't think he said 60. I think he said 600, 6,000. And you're like, yep, 666, bro.
Oh, yeah, I caught that.
We got you. But
and also all this reference to beasts. And they had a lot of beast analogies with with horses.
because he's trying to relate it to what's natural to the order of the universe and the world.
But I mean,
you know?
but the idea that the animals are made beasts when they are subjugated.
Yeah.
Or maybe not. No, because the idea of Satanism is to, like, it's interesting to me because like the ideal, like, part of yourself you're supposed to identify with is not the God part. It's supposed to be like the beast part. So it's like, but is it beast nature for the tyrant? It's like the tyrant doesn't know how to be divine, so he wants to subjugate everyone else so that they'll be lower than him, and he can enjoy hedonistic desires. But is that like
What's your point or your question exactly? There.
that they're promoting beasthood not for themselves but for their subjects, basically. That you guys need to in order to not feel that you're being
alcohol.
in order to not feel like you're being subjugated, to not like feel like offended by the condition that you're being encouraged to live, you should identify as a beast and not identify as a man or as a god. Like, identify as a beast who is doing his beastly, you know what I mean? Like, if you're no more than a beast, then it's like, oh, you're lucky if you have pleasures and food and comforts, because you're nothing but a beast. And if you're being pushed and burdened and treated like shit and garbage, you also deserve it because you're a beast. You know,
Mm-hmm.
You're no more than an animal that to be used as someone else's tool, or you're no more than an animal, basically.
Yeah. So
You have to forget that you have standards. You have to forget that you have higher standards. Is that what they're trying to, like, when they say, like, identify with the beast part of you? It's like they're saying,
I'm not sure.
It's like
I think we might come to that.
Forget about any higher standards that you have inside of you, any higher desires that you have in you. You know what I mean? That's all bullshit. You don't need to worry about that. Like, freedom, you don't need to worry about that.
Yeah.
I mean, doesn't. But then he talks about how beasts themselves want freedom by their very nature.
Yeah.
Because a horse will complain, an ox will complain.
And he's like, unless you rear them from when they're...
A bird will lament. No, but even reared, domesticated animals are still inherently have desire to have freedom. So it's like even,
they die in captivity sometimes.
That's why it's saying, like,
I mean, that's proven. Death's in
So
captivity. I like to look that up.
that's why beast or animal isn't even would be the right description for this kind of whatever you're identifying with inside of yourself. It's not the beast or animal part either. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's kind of a, they're using the word beast as a euphemism, or like as a substitute for something that's lower than or worse than, because obviously even beasts and animals desire freedom and have higher ideals for existence.
Okay, this is an interesting thing on elephants, for example. At lcanimal.org, they talk about how wild elephants have long lifespans and typically live 60 to 70 years of age. captive elephants have significantly lower lifespans than their wild counterparts and are usually dead before the age of 40. Captive elephants suffer from chronic health problems such as tuberculosis, arthritis, and foot abscesses, which nearly always lead to premature death. Furthermore, attempts to breed in captivity have been largely successful, only, freedom from abuse. Wow, they're talking about that right here. When left alone, elephants are very peaceful. Aside from humans, elephants have no natural enemies. Damn. That's trippy to think about.
They're huge. You stay out of the way.
Yeah, you're right. Interesting. All right, so back to some of the quotes here. When they lose their liberty through deceit, they are not so often betrayed by others as misled by themselves. This is why men born under... Two different quotes. This is why men born under the yoke and then nourished and reared in slavery are content, without further effort, to live in their native circumstance, unaware of any other state or right, and considering as quite natural the condition into which they were born. And that goes into the animal rearing as well, but then you have the stuff with, the masses whenever a tyrant takes, power and the generations that follow. And he talks about, monarchs and some other things in these examples. But he addresses that later, that it's not just, there are tyrants that are installed by the people as well. And that's another form of it. And, while it may look the same, or it may look different in the beginning, it could just as easily outstrip all the other tyrants, and, anyway. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Jared. Kind of just was reading it and...
But what could easily outstrip all the other tyrants?
The ones appointed by the people instead of taken by force or inherited. And he was saying those were the three different ways. And, in this modern world, we think we're living under such a more honest system because, we have an option of voting. Unless you're a felon, you don't have an option of voting. Unless, a few other things.
That's why voting
not just non-violent felons can't do this. The drug war, for example, obviously, violent felonies, you could even consider that. But, for non-violent people who are hauled off and kidnapped and put in a metal cage, I don't know, blows my mind, Not that, in your opinion, Jared, voting kind of is another way that we're subservient to...
It's more harmful than good because it tricks people into choosing it.
Yeah, you're choosing, you're a participant in your slavery. Dog reacting to someone coming in the door. Oh. Poor young puppy. But,
Yeah, we're trying to teach him not to bark so fucking loud by yelling at him.
They don't speak English. They're just yelling, shut the fuck up and shit. Anyway, it's an interesting exercise on,
speaking of dogs.
Wow. Yeah, the Pavlovian dog thing, that was crazy with, and it was interesting, they're talking about that with the Spartans, how they raised them and reared them. They were, taught to value freedom above all else, which is interesting. But not for everyone else, just themselves. The Spartan peers oppressed, they had a slave class. I forgot what those were referred to as. Shane might know, but anyway. All right. Oh yeah, this is that thing right here. Lycurgus, the lawgiver of Sparta, is reported to have reared 2 dogs of the same litter by fattening one in the... And again, if anybody's tuning in, we're getting this from... Discourse of Voluntary Servitude with Étienne de La Boétie, written in the 1500s, and he's referencing cases in ancient history, and he references a lot of history to make his case. So here he's referring to Lycurgus, the lawgiver of Sparta, is reported to have reared 2 dogs of the same litter by fattening one in the kitchen and training the other in the fields to the sound of the bugle and the horn, thereby to demonstrate to the Lacedaemonians that men too develop according to their early habits. He set the 2 dogs in the open marketplace, and between them he placed a bowl of soup and a hare. One ran to the bowl of soup, the other to the hair. Yet they were, as he maintained, born brothers of the same parents. In such manner did this leader, by his laws and customs, shape and instruct the Spartans so well that any one of them would sooner have died than acknowledge any sovereign other than law and reason. Now, it's interesting that they mentioned law and reason, and I wonder what that meant to the Spartans. I'd like to look at, Plato and others' works, and he obviously wasn't Spartan, but an Athenian philosopher. But yeah. He says, the essential reason why men take orders willingly is that they are born serfs and reared as such. And this is another thing with the rearing. From childhood, we are brought into a government school and instructed by our, the people who take money from us that, that this is the way it is, this is the game, like, you're very free, you have one of the freest countries, we believe in freedom so much, yet we have the largest prison population on the entire earth. 25% of the world's prison population. U.S. prison population. I believe it's 2 million as of, I don't know that statistic I looked at, 2016 or something. Out of 9 million incarcerated prisoners in the world. Prison population in the U.S. And then later Etienne references how our patriotism and our admiring the shine of it like a moth to the flame is what we clothe our rulers in, these veils of religion and patriosity, that they are so bright that we just want to be consumed by their flame. We're okay giving them because they're doing so much good for everybody. They're helping everybody so much.
Well, it's a way to swallow the pill, or the way to.
Here we go. Yeah.
When everybody bows their head and concedes to a bully, they know what they're fucking doing. So they have to distract themselves, so that they think they're doing something else.
Yeah.
There's a reason why you need religion, even though it's boring and stupid.
So 2.2 million Americans, and this is just in 2016 alone, so per year, by the way. That's the prison population. Sorry, I'm going to back that up. In 2016. But then the people who have become prisoners and cycled out, I thought they estimated, I think it was 20 million incarcerated. I don't know. How many incarcerated per year in the U.S.? $10.7 million arrests, excluding traffic violations. And 2.3 million people were incarcerated in jail or prison. Okay. 10 million arrests, 2.3 million in jail or prison. I don't know if that increases with each year or how that works. And that's, wow, the same article. The whole pie, 2020. Yeah, we got a more recent article, 2020. Let's look at this. The prison pie.
Prison pie.
Dude, check this out. State prisons, 1,291,000. Local jails, 631,000. Federal prisons and jails. Do you notice that 713,000 are for violent crimes? Not convicted. Yeah, that they're going through the process.
Yeah.
So 713,000.
I saw that. That was the first thing I saw. Non-convicted.
Yeah. Like, what the fuck? Youth, 44,000, which is interesting. All right. So what's the total number here? And I'd like to divide the 713,000.
I doubt that that's how many. I doubt that that's right. Like
they say 2.1 million. You doubt the federal government's?
No, I doubt that the largest percentage is actually violent crimes in state prisons.
See, I agree too, because based on arrests, they were saying like 40% of no-knock raids were drug related. So I don't know if I believe this either, but
I would think there's way more non-violent people in prison overall, Because I mean, like
That would be public order and drug. And then not convicted. That's local jails. Violent is only 13,000 of the federal. So 13 plus 713, 726. Fuck, man, math. Let's say 500,000 here. So 1,500,000. So 2.13 million, roughly, a little more. I think it's 2.2 is what it estimated. So 2.2 million. So 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, divided by 726,000. What you have is 30%. I think I did this wrong. Oh, I didn't do 1,000. I did fucking... No, 726,000. 2 million. That's correct. 3%. I might be doing this wrong.
3% is what? What's 3%?
Violent crime.
Okay.
That can't be right, though. I think it's like 30. Alright, so wait, hold on. 30 times 726.
Where are you getting this? No, I didn't see it. I didn't see the way your math or whatever.
21 million. No, I'm doing this wrong. Well, it's close to 1 million, so it's less than half. If it's 2.1 million, 726,000. So you're probably looking at 48%, max, roughly. Looks like I'm doing my math wrong here, but anyway. So, the incarceration situation, the games, what is talked about next here is that what the tyrant did to establish order, especially in Rome, the Lydians, but also later against Rome, he established it in brothels, taverns, and public games, and issued the proclamation that the inhabitants were to enjoy them. He found this type of garrison so effective that he never again had to draw the sword against the Lydians. And I was telling Jared partway through that the Persian Empire and the Egyptian rulership gave alcohol to the population for various occasions, or slavery, but also for births. Like a year and a half supply of wine was granted to a certain, time period of the Persian Empire to, mothers who have just birthed a child. And then it goes on. Plays, farces, and spectacles, gladiators, strange beasts, medals, pictures, and other such opiates. These were for ancient peoples the bait towards slavery, the price of their liberty, the instruments of tyranny. So they're using these games, but also the awards, the pictures, the sparkling, dazzling, and we still have all this to today. We have our most, all the awards given by, federal agencies and private, entertainment sectors, and, the movies, plays, the news cycle is the spectacles, the gladiators, gladiators would just be our games, I would say.
The Hollywood award shows.
And that's the pictures and medals for sure, and other such opiates. And that's the other thing. The government's been proven to have, the CIA moving cocaine and crack and spiking and targeting the black community and a few other things that are just interesting over the years. But the stuff hasn't stopped, everybody. It's still going on. Yeah, adoring the tyrant. And he's like, can that even be it?
Thank you for your help.
Yeah, for your service, When we were just looking up
us.
We were just looking up the other night that only 7% of an I think it's 0.4% of an officer's time is spent stopping or responding to violent crime, and 7% to theft. So then it amounted to I think those numbers were 4 and 7, and I wish I hadn't deleted. Actually, I didn't. It's up here. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing that up is like we thank the military for keeping us free, yet we've got what the military is actually doing overseas is it's a little bit different than that. We thank police officers for protecting us against violent crime, and yet rape kits go untested. Rape kits glossed over for drug war, because big money comes in the form of why is it searching? Go. All right, the backlog .org. It's a organization that and there's some articles on this, you can look into it. But rape kits are passed up often. Lack of resources. On average, it costs them between $1,000 and $1,500 to test one rape kit. Wow. Okay, so they're gonna say that. Not enough money. Not enough money to do it, so they got to raise the money to do the test. Is that really their reason? But the reason is it doesn't make them money. What makes them money is catching people with drugs that aren't harming anybody, and traffic violations and other things. And you look at how much of an officer's time, how much goes to traffic, how many,
Do you think there's an arrest quota for the prisons? Like, the prisons have a deal with the police departments to get an arrest quota? I wouldn't be surprised.
Prison incarceration quota. There was those deals with those judges who were funneling in and making money somehow off of funneling youth into the prisons, which was fucking nuts. Spend public dollars on blah blah. Private prison quotas drive mass incarceration. That sounds interesting. Study finds. Most of the private prison contracts in America require states to keep at least 90% of prison beds filled or pay a penalty to private for-profit corporations. What the fuck?
Yeah, they have to keep those fucking beds
you gotta keep those beds filled. So when they legalize weed, we're gonna mandate the masks and ban assault weapons and fill those fucking beds, man, because we gotta make our money off the population. Land of the free, home of the enslaved. And I wouldn't be saying this if we didn't have 25% of the world's prison populations. Additionally, another 4.7 million adults are on probation. And I'd like to know how much of that is violent. Honestly. Here we go. With mostly nonviolent offenders. Most have filled U.S. prisons, according to a Human Rights Watch report, have filled U.S. prisons with mostly nonviolent offenders. 54% of state prisons are sentenced to more than a year, which is a felony, were serving time for a violent offense. Okay, so 54% violent. That was higher than I thought it'd be, honestly. With the no-knock raids, it's we were reading it was 40 to 60,000 a year, and that I think 40% of them. Man, maybe I'll throw over a clip if I edit this up at some point of our discussion on some of that. But yeah, by the way, if you're listening, you can check out Jared over at Mentally Illest Radio, where he discusses a lot of stuff going on in society, kind of before our very, I don't know, describe it to me, Jared.
I like to do controversial or pretty much process dialogue concerning controversies in shadow work topics. But we also discuss current events sometimes, and talk shit about the government too sometimes. We'll do a whole show talking shit about the government.
Now, I wouldn't be bringing some of these up except Biden is continuing to build Trump's wall right now. And the police state is growing. They're talking about banning assault weapons. Are we not turning into Prison USA? Are we not turning into, the land of the caged animal, Like, and what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, turning into since COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, throughout our history. I mean, a lot of these laws have racist roots. For example, coming up in the past, the policing industry was started in the South to catch slaves. And the policing industry up northeast, just, a year or so later, started to, protect shipping interests of companies coming in through the ports. But in both cases, you're protecting the property of the elites, whether it's the slave owners or the mass, companies that are making tons of money. It wasn't to help the people and stop rape and murder, it was to catch fucking slaves and, protect, the interest of, shipping barons.
Yeah, but the secondary purpose of government services is to help people. The primary purpose is to collect taxes and to imprison people who don't.
And serve the interests of special interests, from the pharmaceutical companies to, the oil industry, the, military industrial complex, and all these complexes that are in bed with the government, and even the medical, by the way, which is driving up a lot of prices. And things like they only allow a certain amount of ambulances to operate, in it, to where only like one or two companies, have that, where there's less competition to lower rates, and then from that to, and it doesn't matter if they have all the certs or whatever. And this is a law enacted around Chicago, and these interesting things you find, created scarcity. Your ambulance number restricted. I am having trouble here. Alright. Here we go. No, this wasn't it. Damn. I'll drop that article in there later if I edit this and split it apart into commentary. Reaction to... So, Jared, what's your reaction to a lot of what you're hearing and, reading here? And feel free to look at anything else, bring up anything else. We'll just do some closing comments. Don't want to wrap this up too long.
The reaction I think that most people would have, they fully understood what this guy is saying. He's saying it's your fault you're a slave, not your enslaver's fault. That's the main point. Like, you are choosing to be a slave. You're not a victim to being a slave. You're not a victim to anything.
Yeah, you're participating in your own slavery.
Yeah, exactly. You choose to be a slave, and there's no one else you can point at. It's like, like they have no power over you than the power that you give them. That's like the whole. And then also that. And then the second part, or went into like talking about how you can't be friends with tyrants. And friendship is a holy thing, and tyrants don't even love or are ever loved. Really, all they are is just admired and sucked up to, and so like destroying the notion that you can be friends with these people, destroying the notion that it's just because you voluntarily decide it, that somehow it's not what it is. Like, if you decide to be somebody's slave, just because you make friends with them doesn't change the fact that you decided that.
He said, yeah, friendship is never developed except between persons of character. It never takes root except through mutual respect. It flourishes not so much by kindness as by sincerity. And the tyrant is never truly loved, nor does he love. It's a section that I'd like to hit over. But you were just bringing up this point. He who thus domineers over you has only 2 eyes, only 2 hands. These are only humans, only one body, no more than is possessed by the least man. Whether this is a politician or a special interest or or whatever you want to identify as the ruling class or the enforcers of this. He has indeed nothing more than the power that you confer upon him to destroy you. Where has he acquired enough eyes to spy on you if you do not provide them yourselves? How can he be so many arms to beat you with if he does not borrow them from you? The feet to trample down your own cities, where does he get them if not they are your own? How does he have any power over you except through you?
But those are the only choices that we had. Like I mean, if I want to get a TV and all the TVs have cameras in them, I mean, I don't have a choice but to have a little camera on my TV, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it, and that was what he's talking about, being tempted by pleasure and the grandeur of the state.
If I can't get a job anywhere except for to consent to taxation, well then I don't have a choice.
Yeah.
I mean, they're stealing from me because I there's nothing I could have done to stop it.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. So, that's what it's talked a lot about here, and I really like.
Acknowledge that your own choice and take your power back. Like if you're choosing to give them this much, don't say that that you didn't have a choice and that you're a victim of their taxation or their.
And again, talking about anarchist principles and talking about freedom, talking about trying to assert our independence and sovereignty and all that. I think this is one of the best quotes there. Is that I do not ask that you place hands upon the tyrant to topple him over, and this includes police in my view, honestly, unless you're defending your life, but simply that you support him no longer. Then you will behold him like a great colossus whose pedestal has been pulled away, fall of his own weight, and break in pieces. And honestly, maybe even resetting these institutions, like the Sunset Clause, Thomas Jefferson and Elon Musk, have talked about, of laws expiring and they have to be repassed and have enough support to be repassed. So we're not living under the traditions or the tyrannies of our forefathers that we never agreed to. We were just born into this. Where is the consent of the governed? But is violence and governance and all that even a completely legitimate thing, or not something born out of fear, cowardice, the ability to not want to live free?
Well, people always argue that the service is important, and yeah, you're right. The service is important, but the service isn't government. You guys can't seem to fucking get that through your head that you don't need it to be provided by government. You can have these services that are so important the government provides.
Peacekeeping officers, for sure.
Like peacekeeping and roads and infrastructure.
Like it was in the early parts of this country.
Where there is demand, there will be supply and opportunists to meet that demand. That's how free market economics works. There's always going to be people who will jump on an open market.
Yeah.
And these services that they provide suck. Okay? So yeah, you don't need to bow to bullies to get these services and this infrastructure. You can stop supporting it. You can stop supporting it until they collapse and become obsolete, and then somebody will take their place and hopefully offer a better product or service that then you can accept. Or make your own, be a part of providing that service or product yourself. That would be more proactive than waiting. But
these guys reference him too, but they're trying to go from dictatorship to democracy. But what is
What is two wolves and one sheep voting on what's for dinner? You know, if not democracy. Is it right for the 51% of an entire nation to impose their will on the 49, you know, violently at the barrel of a gun and kidnapping?
But how else will people organize? There'd be no incentive to organize if they
So,
weren't being forced to.
I would say as local as possible, and as voluntary as possible. And I think that's where the consent comes in and a lot of other things, like basically, and take that as far as you can, and maybe let some areas be completely voluntary, and maybe some areas they want to be more strict. You know, maybe California wants to ban assault weapons like in their jurisdiction, you know, whatever. But like, I think that the more local, for California and New York to impose in some of these places, and you know, major city areas, to impose all this on the rural areas where I live 3 miles down a dirt road. Like, if the meth head down the street has something to take me out, and by the way, should have the right to defend myself against a foreign invading army, which, you know, could happen. This isn't out of the question. You know, Russia's on the border of Ukraine going into there. China's, you know, disobeying things, you know, doing things in the... Yeah, continue there, sorry.
I just had an idea.
Sure.
What if government officials kept their same name, kept their same job, kept everything kept going the way it was before, but suddenly they stopped acting like governments and they stopped acting like gangs, and they actually started respecting each other. And even though they still called each other police, the police didn't kidnap people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And even though they called them prisons, the prisons were mostly empty, and they didn't use them for profit. Like, what I'm saying is that, like, and what if this wasn't something that was voted on and people weren't forced to do this? What if it was like people just started standing up for themselves at the lowest level? What I'm saying is that, and over time, people start, like, just from individual to individual, you know what I mean? From any person in a position of authority to anyone who's supposedly below that person's authority. What if the person in the position of authority realized that person couldn't treat that person supposedly in a lower position of authority like crap without them standing up for themselves and showing them that they're not going to get away with it, that they're going to get a resistance, they're going to get a reaction that says, no, you cannot do this. If you try to do this, I'll make it hard for you. And the bullies suddenly stopped being bullies and backed off on doing those things. They kept providing the services that they provide, but they stopped. Like, I mean, it's like law enforcement wouldn't enforce laws. They would actually just start protecting people and then carrying out the basic, like finding lost vehicles, or searching down a runaway rapist or whatever, and like they stopped enforcing laws and they started actually providing a better service for people, but they still called themselves police, but they weren't actually like working under the capacity of like the same paradigm or viewpoint that they are superior and they have the right to assault people. What I'm saying is it's basically like bullies on the individual level and people who let bullies treat them that way stopped letting them treat them that way without repercussion. It doesn't have to be violent repercussion. It could just be self-defensive, social self-defense. You know what I mean? You raise your voice, you posture yourself, you say no. All right, you say no to no, I will not do that. And you're ready to fight and die to defend yourself. You know what I mean? And it's like some people will lose their jobs, but then eventually it's like, I'm just saying, what if? There's a whole what if scenario. I'm not saying this is even possible, but like what if over the course of so many people for so long holding on to a certain will. It's like a battle of wills. It's like so many people are losing their jobs because they're saying no within government. But then after a while, the will is holding strong. They need people. They can't just fire everybody. Eventually they're gonna have to concede and say, all right, we won't fire you and we won't treat you like that anymore. And that's a tiny little battle. But then those tiny little battles start being won everywhere. And people stop firing people for saying no and respecting people for saying no. and then people start actually providing good services. You know what I mean? And it's like, you know what I mean? Like that's a change from the inside out that didn't happen through voting or through law changing. It happened because in the smallest level there is the individual, and then the bully who's gonna try to impose his will upon the individual, and the individual says no to the bully.
Yeah.
And that happens everywhere. And then, you know what I mean? That's a what if. There's a what if. It's like you don't need to rewrite the whole system. All you need to do is just start changing the way you behave toward one another, and then the services will get better. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's this really simple principle. It doesn't need to be passed as a law. Like, oh, everybody has to respect people's no's as the new law. Otherwise, they're going to be arrested and thrown in jail.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, no, it's like, it has nothing to do with a third party. There's only two parties. There's the individual and then the bully, and the individual saying no to the bully. There's no third party needed. You know, and the third party would only fuck it up. It wouldn't actually change it from the inside out, like I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, any closing remarks?
Stop voting. Stop giving them your money, and stand up for yourself wherever you're working.
Yeah, civil disobedience and nonviolence
Like,
resistance.
Say no, and stand firm in your no. Regardless of if you know the law or not, or if you lose your job or whatever consequences there are, stand in the right and do it respectfully. When you say no, you have to do it the right way. If you do it with aggression, you're gonna end up getting hurt.
For sure.
You have to make sure that you say it respectfully and you respect them. You're showing them respect by being respectful, but also saying no and respecting yourself. By doing that simple act, putting everything on the line for that, your life will change for the better, I promise you. No matter what you lose, you will gain immediately right afterwards. You will start attracting into your life the things that you really want, because you started saying no to the things that you don't want. You don't want to be a slave. You don't want to be treated that way. You want to be treated with respect. You want your no to be respected. And if you start respecting yourself and saying no, you will start getting what you want. You will start attracting what you want. So that's the closing remark for me.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd just add to that stop supporting, conscious consumerism, educate yourself, look into, what you support and what you don't with your dollar, with your vote, with your taxes, what's taxed, all that stuff. And local things. In our home county of Yavapai, we've had, in the last 2 decades, they've invented a lot of codes and changed the whole region from around Juniper Woods Ranch in Ash Fork from agricultural to residential zoning, and started imposing $750 a day fines for things that used to be legal, and trying to enforce it, and fine people in the thousands of dollars and tens of thousands of dollars, and take property. And the way that they're mostly getting away with it is just people complying, people saying yes, come and take it, but meaning it, come and take it, and not saying any, standing up or offering any even civil disobedience resistance. And I think the nonviolent approach is helpful here, like Jared is saying, that if you want evolution and not revolution and not just a revolving door, that you do not need to place your hands on the tyrant, or even the officer of the tyrant, or the army, the 600
Okay.
or the 6,000, but simply to support them no longer. Don't obey.
I have one thing to say.
Sure.
I think what this is saying is that self-defense is literally equally important as non-aggression. If you let me just say it this way, in the most extreme way, in the extreme way that I can. If you let somebody get hurt, harmed, if you let yourself get raped or harmed, that's equally bad as raping or harming somebody. Can you believe that? You're not virtuous in the fact that you're not raping or harming somebody in being raped or letting somebody be raped or harmed.
Okay? You're equally as bad. Do you understand that? Equally. It's just as bad. People should be arrested, or it's like if you're going to think in terms of the way people think, like people should be arrested and put in jail for the rest of their life for letting themselves get raped or letting somebody else get raped. But that's not the way it should work. Just saying, like, if you were going to think of it in terms of equal punishment.
And in terms of the police, this is the sort of thing I'm talking about. Cops intervene, restrain fellow cop who is beating a handcuffed woman as of April 23rd. This is the sort of stuff we want to see from these people serving the public. Not to stand by and let people get killed or destroyed. They didn't have to kill those officers to stop him from beating that woman. They restrained him, and they're, putting him to the course of the law. I don't know what law that is, and you can check this article out.
When I say letting someone, I mean within your ability. You can't control.
Yeah.
If you're there in person and somebody's being harmed or raped around you, and you have the physical ability to stop it, and you don't, or even if it's yourself, or if it's somebody else, you have the physical ability to put a stop to it, you might as well have been doing the rape and doing the assault, because it's equally bad.
And, later I want to cover your rights as a citizen to do citizen arrests and your rights as far as interacting with some of these areas that are really important, I believe, to being that change that you want to see in the world. Anyway, this is our reaction to Étienne de La Boétie's Discourse on Voluntary Servitude. Thanks for listening, and hope to catch you on more Liberty recordings when we react to various things in the future.
And stay tuned for tonight, later tonight. Hopefully there will be a show on Mentally Illust Radio called Loving the Negative Self, but I'm still waiting to hear back from somebody to see if that's going to happen. But if you're not doing anything later tonight, you could tune in. And
yeah, so shadow work and, talking about, all that. All right.
Have a good day, everyone.
Yep, take it easy. Breathe free.